Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to the Valley Life Podcast, where we're taking theology from the classroom to the living room, storeroom, stockroom, showroom, workroom, weight room, and...
darn near every controversial water closet there is.
my man! My name is Vinnie Hanke, pastor at Valley Life Community Church. That second voice you heard was, if we were professional wrestlers, my tag team partner.
Heyo.
Hey-o.
Off the top rope.
Tag team champs. Mr. Brandon Torres. Hey, buddy, how are you?
Anaconda squeeze.
Yes, sir.
We are doing good, man.
Good. It's good to see you. I'm glad to be back with you.
Always.
We're in our series called Theology Matters. So this is the name of the series you and I do together. And we've covered several topics throughout our history. This is episode 50.
Dude.
And as we were just praying, just thinking about it, we've been doing this for 3 years.
That's why I just got my AARP card in the mail.
That's right.
I'm getting old. This is too long.
That's right. Long in the tooth, you know. I got a few gray hairs in my beard.
Exactly.
A little harder to get up out of this chair now. What we're doing now in this series, however, is we're working our way through a series of topics based on this idea of Google's autocomplete algorithm. So if you type in, what does the Bible have to say about ... We took kind of a snapshot in time, probably about 3 months ago, of the top 10 issues that people were searching and looking for what the Bible has to say about these topics. So we've covered things like sex and transgenderism, LGBTQ community. We've covered smoking and tattoos and getting high. We tackled women pastors, and now we're going to cover some things that, you know, if you talked about them at your Thanksgiving Day table, you probably had some awkward silence to follow.
Did you see the video that came out with, I think Michael Knowles did it just before Thanksgiving, about like he's sitting around a dinner table and there's all like these kind of purple hair, like nose ring, like typical kind of very... super left-leaning young people at the table, and he comes in his, blazer and tie and sits down and goes, "So, did you hear Trump's running again?" And then just watches all of them like explode at the table. It's a lot like that.
Yeah, and that's basically what this series is we're just blowing it up. And the reason we're covering maybe some of these hard issues is because if you're getting your theology from Google, that's bad.
Heaven help you.
It's bad, and we have a firm conviction that bad theology does something. But remind our listeners and our watchers, what does bad theology do?
Bad theology hurts people.
And we don't want anybody to be hurt. We don't want anybody to hurt. We want people to flourish. We want human beings to grow, to be healthy, mature, ultimately disciples of Jesus. And so we want to talk about what the Bible actually says in accordance with these things. So here are our topics today, dear listener and watcher. Abortion, racism, and slavery.
So light reading.
Is
what we're talking about.
Light reading today. So as we begin, you've got some introductory notes in there. You want to just...
I do. So the question that you have to ask, especially if you do even a cursory kind of search through YouTube or Google or whatever, right? You're going to hear all kinds of questioning the Bible on these topics. So the question is, are those people who call either the consistency of God's character in the Bible into question, or even those that would claim that God is a morally reprehensible monster deity for the things that you find in the Scripture, are they right? Are there actually passages of Scripture that condone or even promote things like abortion, slavery, racism, right? Those are the questions. It's not something I think that anybody who's responsible and claims to follow Christ, that's not stuff that you can just kind of hand wave and go, "Oh yeah, you don't know what you're talking about." Like, these are legitimate questions. And the hard part is that because everybody has a supercomputer in their pocket, and there is no like a vetting process or entrance fee for things like YouTube, anybody with an opinion and 5 minutes can put theirs online, and
including us.
Exactly. So take that for whatever it's worth.
That's right.
So sometimes it's become really difficult to try and wade through a lot of the information that's available to us to find ones that are consistent with a contextual and a biblically consistent look at the scriptures. You have to bear things in mind about what it is that you're reading. You're literally reading things that have been translated from one or two different languages over millennia that have all kinds of baggage and history and things that are going along with them, that if you don't bear those things in mind contextually and you bring your own context to those things, then you come away with wildly different ideas about stuff. So, like, we're not that old. I remember watching the Flintstones.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
You'll have a yabba dabba do time. You'll have a gay old time. Was that cartoon theme song advocating for LGBTQ?
Clearly.
IA+.
Clearly.
Because they were promoting that we have a gay old time.
Yeah. I always had questions about how Barney landed Betty.
Right? 1960. Or you could go back even a little bit further, 1943, I think it was. Have yourself a Merry Little Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Make the Yuletide gay.
Yep.
Now, does that mean that we make all of our Christmas decorations very rainbow themed? And I don't think so. But as ridiculous as that would sound, we do the same thing when we take the ideas that we have in our mind and our culture around things like race and slavery and import those into the Bible when we go backwards and we look at what are the Bible passages actually saying, what are they talking about. So I think that's why it's really important to dig into some of these things and flesh it out, see what's actually going on.
Yep. And all my answers to your questions were tongue-in-cheek.
Yes,
so save your emails. Please. So let's dig into our first topic.
He's kidding, folks. He's kidding.
That's right. Let's dig into our first topic on abortion. And so Deuteronomy 32:39 will be our introductory verse. You have that pulled up? You want to read that one for us?
I will. I don't have my, what's it called? I don't have my tablet today. So I can't split the screen like I normally do.
Oh, gotcha.
Which is kind of lame. But so Deuteronomy 32:39 says, this is God speaking, see now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill, and I make alive. I wound, and I heal. There is none that can deliver out of my hand. The whole point of this, and I think a good place to start with the audacity behind the idea of abortion, and the biggest thing that we have to contend with, is that we try to step into the place that God reserves for only himself. In terms of creation, in terms of the beginnings of life and the end of life, God claims total authority and ownership of all of those.
Yeah.
And so where we would want to step in a case like abortion and say, no, we know better, this life needs to end. You have to step in front of God to try to do that. And that is the primary case, I think, to kind of frame this whole thing, is that's literally the jumping off point.
Yeah, is the acknowledgement of the godhood of God in matters of life and death. Mm-hmm. So even if we took a step back and we said, okay, we're going to pull out the topic of abortion and we inserted euthanasia, right, or physician-assisted suicide, yep, or self-suicide in light of a diagnosis or a disease. It violates the same principle.
Exactly.
Right? That ultimately God has authorship and determination and sovereignty over life and death. And whenever we impose our will in place of his, we're assuming a position that does not belong to us.
Yeah, we know better, clearly.
That's right. Yep. So let me just maybe start with a definition and some background on abortion. So when we think about abortion defined, it's the expulsion of the human fetus prematurely. That is, before it's capable of surviving outside of the womb. Okay, so an accident may cause an abortion. We see this actually talked about in Exodus 21, where the law of God actually makes restitution and reprimand for those who may cause an accident that would lead to the premature expulsion of a human fetus. There's some helpful ways to think about abortion because there's different types, and I don't mean the medical procedure, but I mean there's different maybe motivations or reasons. So the way these can be broken down is a therapeutic abortion. So this is done when the termination of the pregnancy is necessary for the sake of the mother's physical health. That is, so it's a medicinal practice in order to avert risk to the mother. There's psychiatric abortion. This would be again, premature removal of the fetus from the womb for the sake of the mother's mental health. There's a helpful quote that says, frankly, in psychiatry, the question of abortion is more often raised because the pregnancy is unwanted than because of a clear and serious risk to the mental health of the mother. I would only add that in some cases, the cure might be worse than the illness because it could put a heavy burden of guilt on the soul of the mother concerned. And so these are arguments or styles of abortion or motivations. There's the eugenic abortion. So this is the use of abortion as a means of keeping congenital defects or gender or a particular race of a child from being born. And interesting footnote, this was the historical foundation of Planned Parenthood.
Margaret Sanger.
Yep, this was her conviction. Planned Parenthood will try to wash this over. I mean, the article's on their website, but they'll try to wash this over and say it was because of her conviction for sexual freedom that she aligned herself with this. No, these were her personal convictions. She saw some races and some economic positions as unworthy, and so it was a way to control the population.
Yeah, it was a page completely out of the Nazi regime.
Yep.
They wanted to do away with black people, Jewish people, and what they would term is retarded or mentally disabled people.
Yep. There's social abortion, so this would be used to ease economic pressure on a family. There's ethical abortion, so this could be argument in case of rape or incest. And then there's abortion on demand, which permits abortion essentially for any reason. This is the current state in California, right after the fall of Roe v. Wade in 22. California essentially codified at-will abortion across the state. So, and then of course there's spontaneous abortion. So these would be the case of miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies. Ectopic pregnancies would also fall under a therapeutic abortion. This is where we're concerned with. So this would be not an intentional premature,
right?
But through, again, if we believe in God's sovereignty, right? Just under His sovereign rule, the end prematurely of a life. So, as we talk about this, we're talking about this idea of induced abortion. So we're talking about the willful, premature evacuation of a fetus from a woman's body for the purpose of any one of those motivations, whether it's on demand, ethical, social, eugenic, psychiatric, or therapeutic, apart from a mother's health being in danger.
Yeah, so the tricky thing, and where I push back on conversations when talking about this with people, is these definitions, right? So this, if you look it up on Google or whatever, this will be the definition of abortion that you find. Yep. What they do with this is they make the umbrella so wide that anything, even an ectopic pregnancy or a miscarriage, falls under the classification of abortion. So what you end up doing is under these very broad definitions where all of these other things that in all reality are not an abortion are lumped in together with it, or the ones that are named separately and classified as the reasoning behind the decision for the abortion, you end up talking past each other in circles because you're both using the same words, but they mean different things, right? So when you have conversations with Mormon people or Jehovah's Witness, and you're talking about Jesus, you're talking about three different Jesuses, right? But you're all using the same name, but you're talking right past each other. Yeah. So, like in these kinds of things, that's where it becomes really tricky because, whether it's for eugenic purposes or what you're thinking of something as ethical or this is going to hurt my bank account, so it's an economic, like an abortion is an intentional ending of the life of a baby.
Prematurely.
Right, exactly. However, something like an ectopic pregnancy or a miscarriage, they have different names for those reasons because they're different things, right? Especially now, the one that gets thrown around a lot and that I've encountered the most personally is for the sake of the mother's life and the mother's safety. I think it was about a year ago, there was a whole movement and petition signed by 20,000 some odd healthcare practitioners and doctors and physicians that all signed on this thing that said, especially with the technology that we have available today, That's not a thing. Like, to say that there's a case in which an abortion, to go in and with a willful intention and malice of forethought to end the life of the baby that's in utero for the sake of the mother's health, rather than just deliver it, C-section, whatever, like, to take the baby out, if it survives, great. If not, that's tragic. It's the same thing as a miscarriage or something else, right? But to go in and just say, no, we're going to kill it, dude, that's not a thing anymore. Like, it might have been 100 years ago, but with the things that we have available to us today, there's no reason for that. So it starts to shrink the pool a little bit, where we can start, in my opinion, we start having a conversation around the thing itself. And so that's where it gets the most tricky for my money, is having this conversation spread out all over the table, because now you're digging in the bottom of the what if barrel, right? Well, what about this? What about this? And you're changing the case and the context and the thing every time you take a step out, where we can't really talk about the thing itself.
Right. From a Christian perspective, as what we're really talking about is what we believe about the origin of humanity, when life begins. That mostly socially, politically, legally, has not been an arena in which people want to engage,
right?
Because they reduce it to a religious question, and so then we get pushed aside. And rather than, again, for us as Christians, when we're asking what does the Bible have to say, we cannot get away from Deuteronomy that we read, in which God is the Father of life. So every single human being, regardless of circumstances of origin, whether it's the beautifully designed by God covenant marriage, or the tragically sinful rape or incest, every single human that is conceived, God is intimately involved in it and has dignity, worth, and value.
Yep.
So for Christians, the question doesn't become when is an abortion okay?
Right.
The question is, when does a fetus, or when does life begin?
Yeah.
And if it's human life, then it must be protected, guarded, and valued, because God has been intricately involved in creating it. Back in the 70s, when this abortion crisis really begins to flourish, Dr. Carl Henry, a Christian medical doctor, he says this. He says, a Christian response to the abortion crisis encourages a new respect and sense of responsibility for the body and its use. There's a theology of the body.
Yep.
He goes on, a woman's body is not the domain and property of others. So we would echo that, affirm that, as two men talking about abortion.
All the feminists in the room go, yay!
Yeah, we want you to hear that, that a woman's body is not the domain or property of others. It is hers to control, and she alone, he continues, is responsible to God and to society for its use. When she yields that control, now that becomes an interesting question. When she yields that control and through pregnancy is involved in an interpersonal relationship with a second party, so think about the father.
There's two to tango.
Right? And through conception, a third party, so now we have a baby. And indeed, to human society as a whole,
yes,
it becomes too late for her to justify abortion on the basis of self-determination, or I would add self-autonomy. The God of creation and redemption is also the guardian of the womb. However much abortion on demand would contradict or scorn such a conviction.
Yeah, it's such a cool thing to see somebody like speaking to not just the mother in this position, because so often the conversation never goes past that. Right? What about the father who's involved in this, right? And then also the personhood being recognized and referenced of the baby in the womb. And so there's no, I don't think it's any kind of coinkydink, right? That the triune God, in the perfection of his design, making mankind in his own image with the imago Dei, when the two become one flesh and go and be fruitful and multiply, now the two and a third together are all of one substance in the same place at the same time. To break those things apart, to try and atomize the family at that level, and then to disregard one ostensibly for the sake of the other, or the two of them, but mostly in most cases it's just the one. That it's such an offense to what God has begun and what God has done in that situation.
Yeah. I want to touch on one more thing, because we've got some other topics to work through. Maybe a couple more things on this. But you raised a question in our notes about the idea of abolition versus being pro-life.
Yes.
What is an abolitionist, and why is that different than pro-life?
So pro-life, and I don't think this gets talked about a lot in most Christian circles, and so I thought it'd be cool to bring it up. Most people think, especially within wider evangelicalism, that pro-life is like where we're at, right? As Christians, as conservatives, like we're for life. That's the opposite position to being, pro-choice. So what the problem is with pro-life is that it stops very short, right? There's a lot of people within our government, within our politics, that are pro-life. They label themselves that way. However, they're still okay with abortion up to a certain point. They're still okay with legislation and laws that protect the mother, in their terms, from any kind of repercussion or consequence because of an abortion. An abolitionist, they take that name from the abolitionist movement when slavery was still around, of the Christians in the country who decided that we need to abolish completely and get rid of slavery, not to make caveats around it or not to make conditions better, or we're gonna make things cleaner, pay them a little bit, whatever. Like, get rid of slavery. It needs to be abolished entirely. So the abolitionist movement within the context and the conversation of abortion is the same thing. They need to get rid of abortion entirely, not with a statute of limitation on a time frame or conditionally. If this happens, then abortion's okay. Or as long as it's not done in a medical office and you get a pill sent through the mail, then abortion's okay. No caveats for that. There's a group, I think Apologia is kind of spearheading it. They're the ones I've seen the most about it. But they're all throughout the country, the nation. They're passing and writing bills, legislation for equal protection for the mothers, but also for the babies. In these cases, you have a situation that is unique around abortion, where if you come from a Christian perspective and a biblical understanding, that abortion is the murder of a child. It's a knowing, willful, malice aforethought, this is going to end the life of a human person.
Yeah, I think that's specifically when we talk about abolitionists. That's the definition of abortion we need to use. Right. The willful, with forethought and malice.
Yeah, so
termination.
Not miscarriages.
Right. Yep.
Not ectopic pregnancies.
Right.
Not, I got into a car accident and delivered early and the baby died. Like, none of that. And in the legislation, there are specific, detailed, express guarding around all of those things. Like I said, there is guards for the mother as well. But for a knowing, willful abortion, that is the only case in our country currently on our laws, on our books, that you can kill another human and have zero repercussions. Nothing happens. Nada. So the legislation runs that if you knowingly do this, you would be held legally responsible for the murder of that child. So everybody involved is legally responsible. That comes from the Bible, believe it or not. That's one of the things that we had on here, and I don't know if we got it, but it's in, I think it's the Exodus 21.
Yeah, I can pull that up. That's easier.
I think I got it. But this is where Moses is talking about the laws around how to deal with all these different kinds of things, a lot of the civil laws. And it says in Exodus 21, verse 22, when men strive together, so two guys fighting, and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm. So there's two cases, right? So they're fighting, they hit a pregnant woman, child comes out. In the first case, where there's no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But in the second case now, if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So if you did something that caused a woman to deliver early and that baby died, you died. There's capital punishment for the death of the child. The same way that it lays out in the capital punishment for murdering another adult person, right? So this equal protection of the humanity of whoever the victim is the kind of the underpinning behind this idea of the abolitionist movement, legislation around it.
Yep. So in the context of the Christian worldview, there's both positions. Mm-hmm. There's pro-life, and there's the abolitionist movement, and there's a spectrum, at least on the pro-life side, of what that means, right? Especially if you, as we mentioned, listen to the political landscape. There are politicians who say they're pro-life, but they're negotiating the number of weeks that abortion can be legalized, and again, that's a whole host of another perspective. The abolitionist, there's no weeks,
right?
There's no, and it's probably worse than maybe the left or non-Christians would think.
Yeah.
In terms of is that there's no circumstance in which we would condone.
Yeah.
Right. The intentional, willful, with malice aforethought ending of human life. Yeah. Regardless of age or stage of development.
Yeah. You have to just plug that into any other situation, right? Mm-hmm. Does it hold up in the law court?
Right.
Nope.
Yeah. Before we transition topics, I want us to think about the value and dignity of human life in the womb as testified to in the gospel. We're recording this the week before Christmas Day, where we celebrate the birth of Christ, who came not as a fully developed man showing up, riding a lightning bolt down from the heavens, but rather through the supernatural development in Mary's womb. Yeah. Chose to endure birth, chose to endure life and development, bestowing worth, value, and dignity on every stage of human development. If we flash forward in the Gospel of Luke, we have Mary pregnant with Christ, who comes and visits her cousin Elizabeth, who's pregnant with John the Baptist at that point in time, and we read that the baby John leapt in Elizabeth's womb, again, conveying dignity, life, worth, personhood within the very womb. Yep. As Christians, this is a topic we need to think deeply about. We need to think biblically about. We need to think pastorally about. And we need to refrain from the pressure of Google or society or political party or anyone else. And we need to come back and decide who we really believe God is. If he's capital G God, then we must be bound without apology to what he determines life is, and value and worth and dignity.
Yeah, who gets to say when life begins? Is it the one who said, I knit you together and formed you in your mother's womb? Yep. Have you seen the thing with the light flash?
I have not.
So that's something worth
worth a Google.
Right?
Not your theology, but this might be good.
Science has actually come to a point now where through the ridiculous microscopes that we have, they have filmed the point of penetration where the sperm gets into the egg and fertilizes the egg. When that happens, there is an observable, recorded flash of light that happens that they have no clue what it's from or what causes it. Chemically, biologically, everything that's in the observable sciences cannot account for that happening, but yet it's on camera, it's recorded over and over and over again, that at the point of fertilization of the sperm and the egg, there's a flash of light.
if we can find a reputable site, we'll post a link to that
Yes.
in the show notes. We want you to be careful out there with your
Yeah.
search engine.
Yes.
You ready to move on to another topic?
Oh, yeah.
Let's do something easy.
Let's do it.
Let's do racism.
Oh, okay. Lightweight.
That's right. So what does the Bible have to say about racism?
It's bad.
That's right. So some questions to think about here. What does the Bible have to say about racial differences, and what should be the believer's attitude toward those of other races? So I'm going to give you maybe the bumper sticker answer that's not super helpful, but nonetheless has a kernel of truth in it.
Okay.
In terms of the Scripture, there is one race,
Yes.
the human race.
You know what I'm saying? That is a total bumper sticker thing.
So that's my bumper sticker.
Yes.
You know, you can say that as, you know, you can say that no matter what worldview you have, if you believe in the universal brotherhood of humanity, and I do, but that's because that's what the Bible teaches.
Yep.
That we are all creatures of a magnificent and glorious Creator endowed with worth, dignity, and value. Now, as we look at the Scripture, we do have the development of culture. We do have the spreading out, essentially the fulfillment of the creation mandate from Genesis 1 and 2, reestablished and reasserted after the flood with Noah. So that's really where we need to start. Its origin is in Genesis 2, but it's reasserted in Genesis 6 with Noah after the flood. And then we have the birth of, rebirth, I should say, repopulation of the earth from Noah forward. And as Noah and his family fulfill all of that, we have this development of cultures, different skin tones, different languages after the Tower of Babel, all of that kind of stuff. So we have this idea from observable human development and culture of different races, different types of people, and some of that's intentional as God commissioned it. Now, when we talk about racism, we are talking about what I would say the Bible describes as partiality.
Right.
That is the lifting up or favoring of one particular human or one particular group of humans over another.
Right, or denigrating another.
Right, yeah, in terms of dignity, worth, and value, and saying this type of human is more important than that type of human, right? Epitomed within the last 100 years in what we made reference to already, Nazi Germany.
Yep.
Right, so we've got the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 6'2" super race,
The Ubermensch,
right?
Yeah.
Who were lifted up to the denigration of everyone else. One of my favorite stories from that period of time of history is Jesse Owens at the Olympics.
Oh yeah,
just eliminating any possibility of the Superman belief in Hitler's when he just
crushed
them on
everybody.
On the track.
Yeah.
It's awesome. That is worth a Google. So that's what we're talking about, racism. You've got an interesting question here based on Matthew 15, 21 through 28. And this might be something, if you get your theology from Google, you might be confronted with, is Jesus racist? So let's look at that passage, Matthew 15, 21 through 28. Let's see if we can at least clear this up for you, for those Google theologians out there.
Yep. So it says, and Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, there was a Canaanite woman, or some translations say a Syrophoenician woman, from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." I've seen multiple videos of guys who are advocates for Islam, who are just kind of doing man on the street stuff and like doing their version of kind of street preaching, are looking specifically for people who say that they believe in the Bible, that are Christians, whatever, and will throw this passage out at them and say, look, Jesus has this woman, this Canaanite, this Syrophoenician woman come, calls her a dog in counter to the children of Israel, right? And says that he doesn't even speak to her. He doesn't even deign her worthy of a response, right? And it's not until his disciples come and pester him that he finally turns around and talks to her. How do you think that's not racist?
Yep. That's out there.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. Jesus keeps talking.
He does. Keep reading.
Keep verse 28.
This will solve a world of ills for people who have like, I don't understand this part of the Bible. Keep reading.
Yeah. So we had as a caveat, and then we're going to keep reading. One of our we do devotionals at our board meetings, and one of our elders led the devotional this last month, and he asked a question. He says, what do we do with people who make false claims about Jesus? How could we be equipped? How could we encourage our kids who are going to be confronted with this at school, and it's particularly on college campuses, or even in a situation that you described, where people make false claims about Jesus? How do we do that? And so his discipleship tool that he gave us in his devotional was to take us to John 1 and just to read John 1:1 through 1:18, which is just this preeminent prologue about Christ.
Yep.
And one of the things you would read in that passage, and this would be a place you could take someone who said Jesus is racist, is that Jesus is the source of all light and life for all mankind. That immediately eliminates this claim that Jesus favored. So, but let's keep reading in context here in Matthew 15, in verse 28.
I stopped where he stopped, just point of fact. But
Yeah,
it says, then Jesus answered her, "O woman, great is your faith," with an exclamation point. "Be it done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed instantly. He didn't just tell her to go away. He actually healed her. In the context of what he was talking about, his whole point of being Mashiach, being the anointed one, the one who was promised and sent, who was he sent to fulfill the covenant with? The children of Israel. So he wasn't saying, I don't like you, you're a dark-skinned woman, get away from me, I don't want to have... He was saying, this is my mission, that I am coming to preach these words to these people. Everywhere he went, if you read through all the gospel accounts, he gets mobbed everywhere he goes. People are sick, lame, blind, deaf, dying, whatever. If that's all he did was just get waylaid by every person who came up and said, I have a need for something, he never would have been able to accomplish the mission that he was there to do. However, he still takes the time. He still has mercy on her. He still credits her for her faith. And heals her daughter. Yeah, that's the part that gets left off of the end of that. And again, you have to take into consideration, who is this that's talking? Jesus was not a blonde white guy.
No.
You know what I mean? If
contrary to Google image searches.
Right, exactly. So if we're being historically accurate, the closest thing would be a dark-skinned man with a beard and shortish hair, probably curly. Historically and traditionally, men from Galilee spoke with a lisp, so that there were really heavy accents, so that you could hear them and go, who are these men from Galilee? Like, how did they know where they were from? They didn't have GPS. So there were all of these character traits that were specific about who Jesus was, because he was who he was, and not that. So he's not in the middle of a whole bunch of other people who look very similar to him. How's he going to pick one out of a crowd and say, nope, don't like that one? Oh, by the way, I made you. I formed you in your mother's womb. You look like you look because I made you that way.
So let's flash forward. Let's talk about maybe how the believer should think about races. And there's a ton of evidence in the New Testament. And again, essentially, it's the sin. Racism is the sin of partiality. Again, the lifting up and overvaluing of one group of human beings over another, or the denigrating of another group of human beings as less than.
Right.
So some practical ways this plays out. And again, it's not. There were issues of partiality in the early church. Preeminent among them was Peter, who fell victim to the Judaizers, who felt like if you were going to become a Christian, you had to become a Jewish Christian, so Jewish first. But God removes all of this in Acts chapter 10, right? And then he takes him to Cornelius' house, and Peter has to enter into the home of a Gentile, which would have violated all of the ceremonial laws and all of the practical Jewish habits.
Man, that whole thing is such a deep dive. Like, I get so geeked up about Acts 10. Like, he's staying at the house of a tanner, which is handling dead things, which is a no-no. Right? And so then God tells him, hey, go to these Gentile people that you don't like, that you don't want to have anything to do with. Where was he?
Yep.
Do you remember?
In the house of the tanner, you mean?
Yeah.
Or inside?
He was in Joppa.
That's right, yes.
What's his name?
Oh, come on, man. You're going to have to help me.
Simon Bar Jonah.
Yep.
Simon, son of Jonah. Jonah went from Joppa to the Ninevites to preach repentance and faith to a people that he hated, that he wanted nothing to do with, and they all repented and believed.
Yep.
You can't get into this stuff. It's incredible. And we just go, oh yeah, it was at Simon the Tanner's house. He was on the roof. It's so amazing.
Yep. Yep. And if you remember the story of Jonah, right? Jonah's got this racist or ethnic prejudice against the Ninevites, doesn't want to go preach to them.
Yep.
But God gets him there. In Acts 10, Peter comes to recognize that the message of salvation is not bound to any one race or any one ethnic background, but is open to all of humanity. As we continue down through the New Testament, we see it reminds us that the judgment of God, that is the condemnation of God, are without partiality.
Right.
So this is the idea of both God's common grace. He has Jesus will talk about this in the Sermon on the Mount, that the rain falls on the unjust and the just equally. God's judgment shows no partiality. We get direction to employers specifically to treat their employees without impartiality. Ephesians chapter 6, Colossians 3:25. And then in James 2, we probably get the strongest warnings against the sin of partiality, racism being one style of that. It's outlawed.
Yeah.
It's by no means, James says, this should not be among you. In James's case, it was economic partiality, right? Giving favor to the wealthier Christians, giving them the better seats while the poorer Christians were ousted. But it's the same sin that's rooted in racism. So if we were to sum this up, Christians are to be impartial.
Yep.
The Bible condemns the idea of racism or partiality. And then we see that play out, whether it's employee-employer relationships, in giving out the gospel, and essentially accepting all who come into the church. Distinctions, including racial distinctions, remain after salvation, but they are not a prerequisite for salvation. That is, God can save anyone from anywhere, from anything, at any time.
Yeah.
The question then becomes, and this is from Luke 10, the parable of the Good Samaritan, and this is where I think really Jesus, this should transcend any accusation of Jesus' racism when he's asked, who is my neighbor? And he gives us the parable of the Good Samaritan. Samaritans and Jews they didn't mix.
Yeah.
They were essentially, there was elements of partiality or racism toward one another.
Oh, it's big racism.
Yep. And then in the midst of this parable, it is the Samaritan who would have been looked at as the lesser than group of human beings who actually becomes the hero of the story.
Right.
And so the question to answer, who is my neighbor? It's any particular human being, but especially those who cross my path who have a need, regardless of their economic, political, national, or racial difference than me.
The thing that's crazy is that parable, he was telling the Jews and was throwing them back. That's coming directly out of Leviticus 19. It's in the middle of the holiness code. Yep. How do we deal with sojourners and strangers in our land, right?
Yep. And
so he was saying that they missed it, but the Samaritan, the dirty half-breed, got it right.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's incredible. In John 4, when he talks to the Samaritan woman at the well, right? So all of these instances of zero partiality. My favorite ones are Ephesians 2 at the end. The whole second half of that chapter, Paul's talking to the church in Ephesus about how they who were Gentiles have now been brought in to the same family, same heritage, the same everything as the Jews. And in verse 19 it says, so then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and the members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. This picture of you were strangers, you were aliens, you were far off, but now you've been brought in and are one family, one household. And then in Revelation 7, It talks about all of those who were the believers, and so many from each tribe. And it says, after this, in verse 9, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. Every tribe, tongue, people, nation, language will be gathered together in glory before the throne of God.
Amen. Amen and amen.
There's no room for racism.
No room for racism. All right. Last topic. You ready?
Let's do it.
Here we go. We'll end on an easy one. Slavery.
Oh, man. This is another fun one.
Yeah. So, again, one of the verses that will get tossed out, especially with those Google theologians, man. Where'd you get your theology degree? Google.
Google University.
Google U is Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. And essentially attached to the question, is Moses condoning chattel slavery there? So let's go.
Yeah, so he's in the middle of kind of doling out rules for, how we do what we do as a nation of Israel. And starting in verse 44, says, as for your male and female slaves, whom you may have, you may buy male and female slaves from among the nations that are around you. You may also buy from among the strangers who sojourn with you, and their clans that are with you, who have been born in your land, and they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit as a possession forever. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly. See, they're property. You can pass them down as inheritance to their sons. And unlike the rest of the Israelites who get a year of Jubilee every 7 years, then they get freed from their slavery, these guys will be your possession forever. How about that, Christian person? See?
So how do we combat it? How do we fix it? How do we address that accurately?
This goes back to the thing about the Flintstones being advocates for gayness and Frank Sinatra singing about having a Yuletide that's gay.
Argument being that words change in context and require an understanding of what they mean.
Yes.
When they're used.
Yes.
So in those two instances, the word gay, maybe we should have cleared this up earlier, meant happy or joyful.
Used to.
Yeah, used to, right? It had no context for sexual desires.
Right. Yeah, but this is the culture that we live in.
Right.
And so it's hard to divorce those ideas from your thinking. You bring them with you. And sometimes you don't even realize you bring them with you.
Yep.
And so when you read in the Bible about somebody being a slave and buying someone as a slave, where does your mind immediately go to?
Oh, it's got to go to the southern states of the United States.
Antebellum South,
Right, yep.
right? The African slave trade, the Dutch slavers bringing them over. Like, there's all of this baggage because we all went to the same schools. We all grew up in the same areas, more or less. And with hearing all these things, and we live in the context and the climate that we do now, it's hard to get away from those images when you see things like that.
Yeah, we think of race-based enslavement where the slave is the property of the master. He lacks any legal rights, or he or she lacks any legal rights or standing or worth or value. Mm-hmm. Right? He or she is reduced to the function of vocation.
Right. So this is, luckily, another one of those just keep reading scenarios, right? So starting in verse 47, if a stranger or sojourner with you becomes rich and your brother beside him becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner with you or to a member of the stranger's clan, then after he is sold, he may be redeemed. Wait a minute, he sold himself? That doesn't sound like any slavery I've ever heard of. Because it was a different scenario.
Yes.
In the context of this entire chapter, which I highly suggest you read, this is having to do with Israel coming into the land that God had promised to them, and God setting up specific promises of protection and flourishing and ownership of the land that he was giving to them as his people, and their rights to that land forever, right? So this is in a time before having a credit score, right? Or being able to file for bankruptcy, or being able to like jump on Amazon and do some e-commerce from your couch, right? If you had land and cattle and livestock and things like that, you had a means to make a living and to eat and, flourish. What about if you didn't? If you have any marketable skills that you could, whatever, you would sell yourself into servitude and belong to another house, right?
Yep.
In, what was the note that I had? Deuteronomy 15. So as nerdy as this sounds, when I first learned about this is why I pierced my ear when I did when I was 18. I read about this practice of a household servant who did not want to be separated from the household that he was a slave of. And so as a sign that he belonged to that house forever, he would go to the doorpost of that house, and they would take an awl or a nail out of the doorpost and pierce his ear through with it as a sign that he now belonged to that house. So in Deuteronomy 15, it talks about that. It says, let's see, where did it go?
Verse 12, if your brother.
Yes. So if your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year, that Jubilee, you shall let him go free from you. And when you let him go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock and out of your threshing floor and out of your winepress. Does this sound like the kind of slavery that we're thinking of?
Does not sound like the slavery experienced in the States.
No.
In our own history.
Why? He goes on. He says, as the Lord your God has blessed you, you shall give to him. Why would you do that? You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. How were they treated as slaves in the land of Egypt?
Which, by the way, is race-based chattel
Yes,
slavery.
that God saved them from
Right.
fantastically and epically and removed them from that. So you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore, I command you this today. So this is God telling them, you do the thing that I did for you. You do that to these people.
Yep.
But, and here's the beautiful part, verse 16, if he says to you, I will not go out from you because he loves you and your household.
That doesn't sound like the slavery in the United States either.
No. Then you shall take an awl and put it through his ear into the door, and he shall be your slave forever. Now, does that mean that you're kidnapping him and putting chains around his neck and he's in your basement and you're keeping him forever? No. It's because he loves you and he would not be parted from you and he wants to be a part of your household. Even from the other side of this, not the emotional side of where I love these people or whatever, he just got finished in Leviticus talking about all of the promises around land and property that belong to the people of Israel forever. So what if I wanted to be taken care of forever? I have no claim in this because I'm not an Israelite.
Right.
I'm from one of the surrounding nations, but I want what you guys have because you guys get all the fruit and all the cows and all the things, and your land is beautiful. What if I wanted to attach myself to this forever? How would I do that? The promises of God are around land and property. So you mean you've made a way where I can become part of the property that's included in the promise of this that God... Yes! Why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah.
Now, me and all of my family and my children that come after me while I'm serving in your house, so all of these things are made provision for. And the common arguments take this beautiful provisional thing that God has designed and totally flip it on its head and say, look at all of this horrible chattel slavery that was going on. And Moses not only says that it happened, but God condones it.
Yeah. If we flash forward to the New Testament times, right, we have the context of the household commands in the New Testament epistles. And so there's even a whole letter addressed to a bondservant or a slave.
Onesimus.
Onesimus and Philemon. And we'll even get Paul's commands like slaves, honor and obey your masters. And so, again, initially, if we've got that cultural, the Dutch slave trade and the enslavement of the African peoples, kidnapped and forced into slavery against their will, that's the opposite of what we're talking about, particularly in the New Testament household codes.
Yep.
And so the word in Greek in the New Testament is doulos, which can be slaves or servant or bondservant. Bondservant would be very similar to the circumstance described in the Old Testament law, in which a person would enter into indentured servitude either to pay off a debt or as part of an economic arrangement because they'd be destitute or in poverty, fulfill their commitment, and then choose to stay on for life.
Yes.
Right? They'd be marked as a bondservant forever. There's a surprising level of legal and social status in the first century in the Greco-Roman world that douloses or servants or slaves had that is not connected to our own history and experience in the United States. In fact, in Roman times, slavery was so extensive that it said that in the early Christian period, 1 out of every 2 people was a slave. And from at least 3000 BC, many captives in war were the primary source of slaves. That is, so during warring nations, rather than death, they would enter into indentured servitude or slavery. In both instances, both in Roman law and in Mosaic law, kidnapping a person into slavery was a crime. You think about the classic example of Joseph's brothers in Genesis.
Right.
That's committed. This is pre-Moses law, but it still violated the spirit of that. That's a capital offense as Moses delivers the law later.
Exodus 21.
Right.
Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death.
Yep.
And Exodus comes before Leviticus, so that's the backdrop against you having the conversation around what a slave is to do, how that all fits.
Yep.
That already existed. So you have to keep that in the back of your head and then read it through that screen and go, okay, now this can't mean what I think it means because grammatically, contextually, like it doesn't fit, it doesn't work.
Yep. Many of that title of doulos, if we want to think about it in a modern context or how we might preach through this, is really that employer-employee relationship in terms of socioeconomic structure. Yeah. We would not call, my son washing dishes at Tin Roof that he's a slave to Tin Roof. But we could say he's a bondservant there, right? He has given them his time, and they've agreed to compensate him and take care of him, so to speak, as an employee, right?
If you've ever gotten a forward on your paycheck, you're a slave for that amount of money.
Right.
You were saying, I agree to work for you for the next however long for the frontage of this amount of money or goods, services, whatever.
Yeah. Do you think some of why this accusation lingers against Christianity is so much of the bad teaching historically, where the Bible was twisted, the Bible was misused, there were bad theologians that hurt people by teaching the practice of condoning slavery because of a misunderstanding of the text and a misapplication of it?
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things to bear in mind when talking about this is if you look at both sides of this issue, right, and you say, okay, well, the slave masters and the slave owners in antebellum South, right, they had a Bible that they were using to try to demonstrate that slavery was not only okay, but that it was given in the scriptures that we are to have slaves. And then you look at who were the champions of the abolitionist movement, both in Europe and in the United States. Both Christian men.
Yep.
Right? Something is off. They both can't be looking at the same material and coming to both polar ends of this spectrum. Well, then you start to find out that the slavery Bible was missing about 50% of the pages in it because they did like the Thomas Jefferson thing. They took
Cut
out
the
all
parts
the
they didn't
things
like.
that
Yep.
they didn't like, right? So there has to be something different in the understanding. So those are the things to keep, I think, at the forefront and go, okay, is this what this is saying? And if that is what it's saying, then how can these people who were the biggest champions of eradicating slavery, looking at the same text and drawing from it that we are not to be in those kinds of situations or relationships with any other human bearing the image of God? There has to be a difference in approach, a difference in understanding, or a lack of understanding when looking at the scriptures.
Yeah, that's good. As we conclude our time together, I want to, as you're listening or watching, I want to ask this question. What do each of these topics, abortion, racism, slavery, have in common? It's this, that they violate the dignity, worth, and value of humanity as image bearers of God. Mm-hmm. And they're all reductionist. What I mean is they reduce the value, dignity, and worth of humanity. The fetus to a clump of cells.
Yeah, or even fetus.
Right.
It's not a baby. It's not a human.
Yep.
It's a Latin derivative word that means something else.
Yep. Identity to skin color or country of origin. Mm-hmm. And then personhood to vocation or function. Right. We were created for more.
Yeah.
We were created to be image bearers of God, who just as God had authority and dignity and relationship with humanity in the garden, we were to demonstrate that toward one another and to lower creation, the animals and the plants and creation around us. Being a Christian means that you are having the image of God restored into the likeness of Christ. It's having sin undone in your personhood, in your identity. Colossians 3:10, put on the new self, for you are being renewed in the knowledge according to the image of your Creator. This is what is happening to us as Christians. Mm-hmm. We are being renewed in the knowledge according to the image of our Creator. That which sin has damaged and broken in us is being restored to us in Christ. Ephesians 4:24, we're to put on the new self then, the one created according to God's likeness in righteousness and purity of the truth. Why do we advocate for life from conception? Why do we decry racism and partiality? Why do we understand slavery different, or why do we condemn slavery in the history of the United States? Mm-hmm. Because each of it violates the likeness and image of humanity as God has designed it. Any closing final thoughts for those listening or watching?
A really cool thing to think about, especially in light of all of this, is if you look at Christ after his crucifixion and death and burial, when he resurrected, he is human still. He's not a phantom, he's not a spirit, whatever. The disciples recognized him, right? Yep. He looked slightly different, but still very much him, to the point where they knew who he was.
Yep.
And he still bore marks in his body from the things that he went through in his life. If he is the firstborn among those who are resurrected, so that he might have preeminence in all things, our expectation for glorification in our bodies, I don't think it's outlandish to expect something very similar. All of that to say, I don't think it's outside of the larger scope and narrative of the idea of the redeeming of all of God's creation.
Yep.
That we're created the way that we're created. We look the way that we look. We are the size and shape that we are by design. And that those things will be carried into eternity with us.
Yeah.
The idea that this life is a dress rehearsal for eternity, but like in some very concrete ways. If you have a problem with somebody who's a different shade than you, you're going to have a rough go of it when they're that color forever in the presence of the Lord. You know what I mean? Like that's one of those things that I think about when I read through all of these things and go, man, this is like for real. This is for all eternity, this is who we are. We're image bearers, but it's so much more specific than that. All peoples, tongues, languages, tribes, and nations make up this beautiful picture, this big tapestry of all these different shapes and sizes and colors that are ultimately put into this portrait of who God has designed us to be.
Yep. Hey, we're glad you're listening and watching, and if we haven't offended you yet,
just wait
longer.
Keep reading.
That's right. For my tag team partner, Mr. Brandon Torres, I'm Vinnie Hanke. As always, God bless you.